So here we are at the beginning of another new year, looking back at the year just gone past and looking forward to the new year. For us as lawyers at Templars, what has 2022 been like for Ross?
I think that in 2022, we definitely saw a lot of players positioning themselves more for a wider African play.
In the oil and gas space, 2022 was largely characterized by divestments by international oil companies in Nigeria.
Well, one of the major drivers of activity for me in 2022 was the Petroleum Industry Act. So even though it wasn't enacted in 2022, 2022 saw operators trying to implement the provisions of the Petroleum Industry Act.
We've spoken enough about the year past. We should just begin to talk about 2023.
Yeah.
Where do we see the year going?
We tend to see that transactions keep ticking along. A slight slowdown around the actual voting dates, but generally transactions keep moving.
I mean, that sounds very optimistic. Now, segueing into specific sectors. I mean, interestingly, again, we'll come back to oil and gas, and it's unsurprising given its importance to the Nigerian economy. In the oil and gas space, as I said earlier, we saw international oil companies announce divestment programs, which are likely to continue into the new year. The ones that had been stalled because we had either litigation stall it, or we had inter-parties dispute. It very well is possible that in this year, there'll be an amicable resolution of both the litigation and the inter-parties dispute, and that is likely to unlock a lot of transactions and activities in that space, both in terms of pure play oil and gas work, mergers and acquisition, and obviously financing for the acquisition of those assets and entities that are on sale. I mean, for you, Sheso, what else do you see happening in 2023?
Yeah, so the conversion deadline is going to be a big one for the first quarter of the year. The Petroleum Industry Act requires any operator that intends to move over into that regime from the old Petroleum Act regime to do so within 18 months of the passage of the Petroleum Industry Act. And that 18 months expires in February of 2023.
So essentially, you're saying under the Petroleum Industry Act, we have the possibility for asset holders to either operate under the old regime of the Petroleum Act
until
or transition into the new regime under the Petroleum
Industry Act. Yes. So, of course, that singular decision has moved quite a lot of strategy for operators in that space. We've seen that indigenous players have, I guess, made their decisions a lot earlier than other players in the industry. But regardless of same, those buckets exist in terms of the operators who have decided to convert, who definitely would be submitting an application by or before that date, and those that are still on the fence and are looking to see what the effects of that conversion would be on their business, and those that would not eventually convert. But regardless of wherever they stand, that date is very pivotal in terms of how the industry is going to move forward. Quite a bit is going to change. There's going to be quite a lot of guidelines and restructurings in place in order to align. Even financings, divestments, and things like that will be governed by new rules and so on. So it's we expect that it will keep us quite busy in that time. It's also possible that some people that are considering using remedies under the old regime, contractual remedies like stabilization, may also have to may make decisions that would see pan out in the course of the year. Hopefully.
So you're saying potentially there may be disputes that will keep your disputes lawyers busy in 2023 on account of some of these changes,
on account of some
these
of
decisions.
On account of some of those changes, and account of some clarity that is lacking in the current law, and there's some teething issues that probably need to be resolved, which probably would have been given more time to evolve. But because of that deadline, it causes people to be more, we need to get an answer right away.
And so when is this deadline exactly?
It's likely, so I guess the most, the majority opinion leans with February 16 of 2023. Because, that's the passage of the
So in 2023, we're not just looking at elections in February, we're also looking at the conversion deadline for the oil and gas sector, which is the mainstay of public sector funding in Nigeria.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting. So when I spoke about my personal experience, one of the things that I identified was the increased assertiveness
Yeah.
of the national oil company NNPC. Now that it has been converted from a statutory corporation into a limited company.
Yeah.
I mean, what has your experience been with NNPC? And I've heard people talk about potential issues surrounding that transition from a statutory corporation into a limited company.
Yeah.
What do you see there, and how likely is that going to be a factor in 2023 in terms of market activities?
Yeah, so that stance is not very surprising considering that the new, I guess, the birth of NNPC Limited by the Petroleum Industry Act is supposed to be that this commercial entity, which is not beholden by the former hold that the government had on it, is allowed to operate these kinds of assets that, as you said, have such a important implication on the Nigerian economy as a whole. So we see that those they're starting to make some decisions that are more commercially minded, given the I guess expectation or the hope that eventually they would evolve into the commercial oil companies that have gone public in other oil producing companies. So one of the deadlines that's also important for in February, on the same February of 2023, is the transfer of assets and liabilities from NNPC to NNPC Limited. There's a deadline in the Petroleum Industry Act that requires those assets and liabilities to be transferred, and a deeming provision which effectively moves over that transfer if that the transfer isn't done within the deadline. So of course we know publicly that the president has made a decision as to those assets that will transfer, and that decision, because we don't have full view of what constitutes that bucket of assets that are going to move to NNPC Limited, affects the kinds of operations. So operators will ask questions around what happens to my liabilities, my current liabilities with NNPC, what happens to the kinds of decisions that I want to make going forward. Financiers need that comfort as well, to continue to provide capital to these operators.
So in summary, all counterparties of the statutory corporation NNPC have some kind of nervousness around what becomes of what is owing to them,
exactly,
obligations, other liabilities owing to them from NNPC, the statutory corporation, and whether those are moving into the limited company, and how things unfold going forward from there.
Yes.
So that's very interesting. Zelda, in terms of your space, what other sectors are you seeing likely going to be very important and active in 2023?
So I think there are a few sectors actually that we can shine a spotlight on. I think the first, where we already saw a lot of activity in 2022, is the healthcare space. So the world is in the aftermath of a global pandemic, not really at the end yet, but coming to the tail end. And in Africa, Nigeria in particular as well, we know that we have had a huge deficit in that space. So what did we see in 2022 that we think will continue in 2023? Investment. We'll see a lot of investment in that space. So not just with the smaller testing labs, but actually probably we will see larger facilities being built in this part of the world. We've had those inquiries, those discussions are underway, but we will see investment going into specialist diagnostic facilities, specialist surgical facilities, and also larger labs as well. So not just your quick testing places, but actually giving larger capacity. The deficit is there, the demand is there, and the investors are certainly interested in it. So we're expecting to see some activity there. And even a subset of that sector actually being the pharmaceutical industry. So the pharmaceutical industry dealt with a lot during the COVID years. So trying to keep up with the demands to create the vaccine, trying to deal with the distribution, the testing, etc. Right? And two things have come out of that. One, they've sort of seen where the gaps are in their both supply chain and production lines, and also they've got a little bit of spending power now, to put it that way. So we're probably going to see big pharma investing a lot in this part of the world. They'll be looking to set up manufacturing facilities. They'll be looking to set up, R&D facilities as well. So I think that's one sector that we can look to see some activity from. Something else that's been interesting in that sector is that we've been seeing the development of a lot of healthcare tech. Right? Tech is now being applied in that sector in a lot of different ways. And so that development is something that we're keeping a keen eye on in 2023. We expect to see a lot more going on there. And of course, you can't talk about tech and not talk about it as a sector to watch in Nigeria in 2023, right? So we know without a doubt that the tech sector, particularly the fintech space, will continue to be very busy. We expect to see a lot of work and transactions and deals in that space. However, based on the experiences that we had in the latter part of 2022, what we're seeing is that investors in that space, particularly fintech, are becoming a little bit more circumspect. So I think those days where investors had a fear of missing out on the next big thing, the next African unicorn, have come to a slowdown.
Am I hearing you talk about doomsday in the fintech
No,
space?
absolutely not. No. Let's not exaggerate. We're not talking about doomsday, but we certainly went through a period in the last 12 to 18 months where there was a lot of attention on the Nigerian fintech and larger tech markets because we'd seen certain unicorns come out of that space. And so the idea was that a lot of investors were like, this could be the next one, this could be the next one. I don't want to be the investor that turned it down, and then it becomes the next biggest thing in Africa.
So is that a way of saying that we're going to see more discernment?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. We're going to see investors being a little bit more careful, and I query whether we'll even start to see some of the valuations take a dip. It's a possibility, right? But investors will be a little bit more circumspect in that space. But even looking at fintech, there's still going to be big players. They're still going to be busy because one of the things that we continue to see and expect to see more of in 2023 is that play between our fintechs and our traditional financial services providers. So I'm talking about our commercial banks, our insurance providers.
So incumbents versus disruptors.
Absolutely. Nail on the head. Incumbents versus disruptors. That's not going away. That's going to continue. And of course, you now have a new class of disruptors, by which I mean you're seeing the telecoms come into the space because, of course, they now have those licenses as well from the Central Bank of Nigeria. So it's going to be a very interesting time in that space. Still very busy, still very active, but from a slightly different angle this year. But even speaking about our commercial banks, the banking sector is taking on an interesting look in Nigeria. So one of the curious things that we saw in 2022 was the issuance of more commercial banking licenses, right? And it's interesting because we're now seeing more traditional banks come into the space, which is sort of taking us back to a couple of decades ago when we had multitude of commercial banks in the Nigerian space. And one has to wonder whether we're going to get to a point of oversaturation, So query whether we actually need all of these players in the market, but it'll be something interesting to watch in 2023, how that plays out, right? I think the other thing that we can look to in 2023 with some interest will actually be how our regulators play. And I think there are two regulators in particular that I think we'll see a lot of interesting things from. Three. One part, we will have the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the way that they regulate and manage our fintech and digital asset space. That's going to be very interesting. I mean, Sesan, we're already seeing some interest from the government with digital assets on the fiscal side, right? So those sorts of things we expect to see more of. Now, of course, that sector is not interested in overregulation. None of us are, and it wouldn't be welcome. However, there is a certain element of regulatory clarity that the market needs and will be very welcome. And that's something that we're hoping to see in 2023. Another regulator that I'm expecting to be extremely busy in 2023 is the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, right? They've been around for about 3 years, but we're really seeing them start to stretch their legs and flex those incredible powers that they have under the Act. So what we're going to see in 2023 is that competition law regulation is going to go way beyond your standard merger approval, right? We're actually going to see real regulation around competition. So I'm expecting to see investigation into dominant position.
So this is the commission taking an assertive look at operations of businesses and
Yes.
spotting dominance, anti-competitive practices,
Absolutely.
and essentially becoming activist in its regulatory purview.
Absolutely. And we saw some hints of that in 2022. The commission was popping up here and there. And so we're expecting that activity to grow. And what it means is that Nigerian businesses are now going to have to become a lot more educated in terms of what anti-competitive practices actually mean from a practical perspective for them.
So from the perspective of businesses and from the perspective of lawyers like ourselves, businesses are going to need to wake up and do a lot in terms of compliance and a lot in
Absolutely.
terms of actually self-regulation to
Yes.
ensure that they avoid the knock on their door by this regulator.
Absolutely. There's going to have to be a lot of self-introspective, analysis, right? In terms of how you're running your businesses, what your counterparty agreements are, and your day-to-day, So that's something else that I expect to see a lot of. So I think 2023 is going to be very interesting across all of these sectors and from a regulatory perspective as well.